Okay, when you're ready to start painting, you'll see that you have a styrofoam plate at your seat. You need to take the pen or the Sharpie and write your name on the bottom of the plate, because you're going to reuse this plate until you're done painting the entire project. And that's the plate that you're going to be putting your paint on. Then you're going to pick up a wooden board and a piece of wax paper. The wax paper is to act like a tablecloth so that we keep the paint off of the boards. The reason why we have the board is so that you can carry your clay project to your shelf when you're done painting, and you just pick the whole board up and move the project to your shelf. That way you're not holding on to wet paint, because if you grab the project where there's wet paint, you're going to leave fingerprints inside the paint. So that's why we paint on top of the board, and we use the board to move our project to our shelf at the end of the period. Alright, when you are ready to mix your colors, you're going to have an egg carton full of all the paint colors that I have at your table. Each paint color has their own popsicle stick, and that's what you're going to use to scoop the paint out onto your plate that's going to become the paint palette. It's very important that you do not contaminate the paint colors. So the brown has its own stick, the pink has its own stick. You need to use this stick to scoop the paint out, put it on your plate, and then the stick goes right back into the color that it came from. If you mix the sticks with the paint colors, you contaminate them. So the yellow will no longer be pure if you get another color inside of it. So please be careful not to do that. So when I look at my project, I've got this kind of silly guy and his body where he's holding a cup of hot chocolate that I'm going to be painting. So I'm just going to decide to paint one of those items first, and I'm only getting paint colors for that particular item for that class period. So I'm going to start with painting the guy's face first. So I know that I'm going to need a color that I want to reflect a skin tone, and that's your choice to decide what color you want to work with. So I know that I'm going to work with white, and then I'm going to have brown to start to make the skin tone. So when you mix colors, you always start with the lightest color first. So I know I'm using white and brown, so I'm going to start with my white. I'm going to take that popsicle stick and I'm going to scoop a chunk of white and wipe it on my plate. I'm going to get another scoop of white because I know that I have to paint a lot that's the skin color, so I'm going to want to mix enough at one time. Then I know I need brown to mix in, so I'm going to take the brown and I'm going to wipe it next to the white on its own spot on my tray, but I'm not wiping it in the white, because if I wipe the brown right into the white, what's going to happen is that the white will be stuck on my brown stick, and then when I go to put the brown back where it belongs, the white's going to go into the color. So that's why I put it on its own separate place. And I might also put a little bit of yellow into the skin tone, so I'll scoop some yellow and I'll wipe that on my plate. Now I'm ready to mix these colors on my plate, which is becoming my paint palette. So when you mix paint colors, you're going to be using your paint brushes to do the mixing. So at your table you've got a tray of paint brushes. Just pick one that you feel like will work with the area you're painting. And I'm actually going to be using the end of the paintbrush handle to mix my skin tone. I like to use the end of the paintbrush handle because it's easier to clean off. If I use the bristles when I mix the colors, all that paint gets jammed up inside the bristles, and then I have to wash that brush really, really well before I actually start painting. So that's why I always use the back side of my paintbrush. When you mix colors, you always start with the lightest color first, and then you put the dark color into the lighter color. So I'm going to be mixing all these colors into the white, and I'm just going to scoop up a little bit of brown on the end of my paintbrush handle, and then I'm going to start to mix it into the white on my plate. I can always add more brown to darken it as I go, but it's better to start with a small amount first so that you're not wasting paint. So now I'm going to be kind of wiping off my paintbrush and put a little bit of that yellow in there. And I think that works for a skin tone. Yes, it looks similar to my clay color, but acrylic paint has kind of a glossy finish, so I'm going to want to paint my entire clay project, even if I think the color I made is really close to what the clay already looks like, because it's going to seal my clay and make it a little bit shiny. So when I'm ready to paint, I'm going to take a little bit of paint on my brush, and I'm going to start painting on the surface. So this is actually a very close match to what I already had in the clay, and that's perfectly fine. When you paint, you're going to want to work neatly. A part of your grade, it comes from your craftsmanship. Craftsmanship means how neatly you use the art supply. So when I'm looking at your painting, I'm checking to see that you covered all of the clay. And then I'm checking to see how neatly you painted. I shouldn't see chunks of paint that were not smeared away with the paintbrush. And some colors might need more than one coat, so you shouldn't see streaks within your paint color. Okay, so this is a majority of the front of my guy's face. And if you notice, I'm picking up my project to paint so I can turn it at all angles. And then I'm going to have to switch to just setting it on the board to paint, because there's going to be paint covering everything, and I'm not going to be able to hold it anymore without putting fingerprints in my paint. Okay, so now that I've got the basic skin coverage on the front, then I'm going to be working on doing the details of his eyeballs. So when I'm done using that color and that brush, I'm going to be cleaning my paintbrush, excuse me, with the Tupperware that's at my table. So this Tupperware has water in it and a big giant sponge. What I'm going to do is swish my brush around in the water. It's okay if the water's not perfectly clear. Then I'm going to start brushing it onto the sponge. The sponge is going to start to absorb the paint out of the brush. I might need to rinse it a couple times. And paint on the sponge a couple of times. And then I'm going to take my paper towel, and I'm going to dry that brush really well on my paper towel. I want to check that it's clean because I'm going to be switching colors. Okay, so maybe my guy is going to be like an old man where he's got gray hair. So I don't have a gray paint color. I have to make the gray. So I know that black and white make gray. So again, I'm going to scoop a little bit of white, wipe it on its own spot on my paint tray. And then I'm going to scoop a little bit of black and put that next to it so I can mix those colors directly on my tray. I'm going to take the end of a paintbrush handle. It doesn't take a lot of black to turn things gray, so I'm going to start with a tiny bit at a time and stir that around. And I think I want it a little darker. Add a little more black. And I might decide to work with multiple shades of gray where I've got a light, a medium, and a dark, just to add some variety. Okay, so if I'm going to be painting his eyebrows gray, then I might switch to a smaller size paintbrush from my tray. And my goal is just to keep the gray where his eyebrows are. If I get gray where his cheek or his eyebrow would be located, then I would need to cover that up with the skin tone again. And I might have to do a couple of layers until I get all that gray all the way down into the crack. So this is my base coat. I'm going to turn my project and get the front, the back, the sides. Okay, now is where I'm going to start to do some detailing. I'm going to clean that brush in my bucket, wipe it on my sponge, dry that brush off. Now I'm going to switch to a round detail brush, and I'm going to make a little bit of a darker gray color. because I'm going to streak some dark gray into it where the little hairs are showing. So that's not showing up well enough. So now I might just switch straight to black. And that's showing up better. If I just put straight black into my wet gray, they'll blend. And I kind of like the look of that. And then I would continue the same thing with the other side and the mustache. When I paint my eyeballs, eyeballs have what we call a iris and a pupil. If you want your eye to look realistic, what you're going to want to do is remember that the whites of the eye surround the colored part, which is the iris. So I'm going to need more plain white on my tray. And I'm going to paint the sides of that eye white, leaving the colored part available. Okay, I'm going to rinse my brush in the water, wipe it on the sponge, dry it off. And I think that my guy is going to have blue eyes, so I'm going to wipe some blue on my plate. And I'm using a small detail brush to paint the iris. The great thing about acrylic paint is that when it dries, you can paint over anything if you don't like it. Next class, when it's dry, you can change colors and try a different idea. But acrylic paint does not wash out of clothes easily. So I would definitely wear an apron. I would roll up your long sleeves to protect your clothes. Okay, so that's kind of a good start, and I want the very center of my eye to be the pupil, so I'm going to put a little black in that center, and I had a hole carved into my clay, so I'm going to push that whole paintbrush all the way down into the hole to fill all the clay on the inside to become the pupil. So that would be the basic start of my eye. If I want my eye to have more detail, I might mix a light blue and do a little bit of detail lines or reflections on my eyeball.